Thanks for downloading the Marcus Pie podcast.
Welcome to the Marcus Pie podcast on historicracingnews.com. This episode brought to you by LeMansCoupes.com. Visit LeMansCoupes.com to see the range of iconic sports and race cars manufactured to the original designs of the 1960s. Well, I'm on location here today, and it's difficult to describe where we are because it's a cross between a toy shop, a dream garage, and a film set. And it's the domain of Julius Thurgood, who runs the Historic Racing Drivers Club. Julius, it's an amazing place you have here, hidden away nicely, but it kind of encapsulates everything you do, doesn't it? It brings an element of fun, of motorsport, and with a great eye to design as well. And it's all about the spirit in which you present your racing.
Very much so. It's my emporium, but obviously a lot of competitors and friends and customers come here. I do sell the odd race car here, and I do a lot of my design work here, and we also do design builds here. So it's a big space, but we like to keep it in period and in character.
Well, it's absolutely fantastic, and it just really evokes so many memories. And all of your ethos really is about bringing back the fun and the enjoyment that club racers had in the past. And I'm going back to the sort of 50s and 1960s era in which I grew up. And that's why I think so many people get emotionally attached to the racing that you do, because it does turn back time most beautifully.
Well, yes, I can sort of say that I grew up in motorsport when friends literally used to take their D-types on trailers to race meetings, and some of them didn't even have trailers. So I was very lucky. These cars weren't worth a lot of money. They were just used because the people loved them, and that atmosphere in the paddocks where everybody was helping each other. We used to club in for each other's fuel and crazy things, and if somebody was in trouble, we'd all go and try and get that car running. And that ethos of comrades and friends, and even if you didn't know somebody, you always try to help. That really stuck with me. And then I went through that world of championships and people being very sterile and not wanting to help each other. In fact, do the absolute opposite. And I went through the school of hard knocks, with sort of Jerry Marshall and Barry Williams and Lanfranchi, and got knocked about quite a lot. So when I got into historic race promotion, I just knocked it back a decade or two.
So you went through that, what we refer to as University of Life qualifications, and turned it back. It's fantastic, and a lot of what you do is very design-led, isn't it? You put out a prodigious amount of supporting literature for your races and your meetings. It's almost beautifully done, and so well considered, because with every step it just gives another strata of history, of characterful racing, which is so missing elsewhere.
Well, I was talking to a sponsor only this week, and he berated me for what I did. He said, how much are you spending on all this artwork and newsletters? And I told him, and he said, that's absolutely ridiculous. We live in a digital world. And I said, yes, but they're not digital hooks on the back of digital loos where you can hang your digital newsletter to read in your own quiet contemplation. And my first newsletter was slightly thwarted because I asked the printer to punch a hole in the top left-hand corner in order to take a hook. And I found that by engaging people through the post, it's going back to a completely different theory. that my competitors, I hope, actually look forward to the postman coming. An HRDC newsletter drops on the mat. They can open it, they can read it there and then, or read it later. The digital world doesn't allow you to do that.
No, that's right. And it's what's interesting is, of course, your competitors come from a broad church of people. They're people who've come back to motorsport, having been competitors in the 60s and 70s. And so they immediately identify with this kind of promotion. But also some of the younger guys who are doing it, and they're guys and girls in their sort of 20s who are coming out and playing. For them, it's something very, very new and something incredibly different from today's very immediate world.
I think it engages them into the sport. They sort of understand it. I now get people coming up to me during events, young racers, or maybe in another race completely. We might be at a modern meeting, if you know what, being the historic content, and they go, "These stickers you've got on the cars, they're fantastic. Can I have one?" And I know you're a great collector.
I'm a mad keen sticker fan, always have been.
And we do various series of decals and stuff, very much in an old school way, and we distribute more throughout the paddock than there are on the cars, and that is people just coming up, just being interested. They want something tactile. They want something. They want to be involved, and it's a sort of lead in to a discussion about what are you doing with these old cars? Why do you race them? How can you race them? Why aren't you on slick tires? What are these strange things you've got on your wheels? Lovely old CR65s, and it starts a conversation, and we find that more and more younger people are coming to us and are getting really interested in cars that even their parents didn't have.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think what it does is it takes them back away from this very, very serious nature of modern motorsport, which is inaccessible to most of them.
Totally.
Even if a young guy or girl comes out of maybe through karting into circuit racing, they're limited so much by what their parents can afford to spend. And if their parents can't afford to take them through a six-figure a year, £100,000 a year plus junior formula, they're not going to get on. They're not going to reach Formula One, whatever else. So at that point, as I've said to many people in my journalistic career, going back more than 40 years, take a step back. Actually, what do you want out of this? You're not going to become a professional driver. You want to have fun. You want to have fun with your friends. You want to have fun with your family. And that's what we see in an HRDC paddock. We have people coming along with their mates. We have people coming along with their mums and dads and coming down for a good old-fashioned day out at the races.
Well, absolutely. But one of the very interesting things is I'm a sponsor of the Oxford University Motorsport Foundation. And these are all university students, and they're studying engineering at university at Oxford. And this has been going on for a number of years, maybe a decade now. And these guys get together and they build and run historic race cars because they couldn't possibly get involved in modern motorsport. And we've had several sort of generations of years of young guys coming through that, building these race cars and maintaining them and running them, and going out into the historic race world and getting positions, engineering positions elsewhere in the industry. And it's surprising how well supported that is.
That Oxford University oomph, as we call it, is good. Ding Boston with that Riley 1.5. Absolutely. I mean, he's become absolutely omnipresent in your type of racing over the years.
Oh, absolutely.
And they've raced and they've rallied the car, haven't they? I think they've been to Barbados.
It's a very slick operation now because they do have a Riley 1.5 rally car and a Riley 1.5 race car. They're not the same car.
Whoa.
They also have an Alpha, and they're building a midget. So it's really taken off, and the industry has now supported it in a big way. Which takes a little bit of pressure off people like me, giving them free entries. But it's great to see that interest and why they've focused on older cars to put their enthusiasm to.
Exactly. It's a good opportunity to actually roll this back to how you became involved in motorsport or cars in general, because we can see then the building blocks of this current organisation. So, I mean, were you brought up in a motoring family?
Well, my father always had great cars. I mean, he was a very well-known photographer in the 50s and 60s, and he did an awful lot of media portraits. And so he had a lot of chums who were actors. Now, actors, a lot of famous film actors, but they weren't always employed. And my father used to benefit from a resting actor needing to sell his Aston Martin or his Alfa Romeo because he's a bit short on a few bob. So we had a lot of different cars: Sunbeam Tigers, 1750 Alpha, DB4, Series 5.
Sound rather opportunistic. This is rather
Well,
good.
it was rather good, yes. The DB4 Series 5 with the registration Pen 15, if you work that one out.
Mightier than the sword, apparently.
Yes, indeed. We had great fun. We had 190 SLs. Robert Shaw came round with a brand new DB6 Volante and said that he didn't like it. He'd only just bought it, and would we buy it? I begged my father to buy it for 1,800 quid, and he said, "Don't be stupid."
If only you could have put them all away
Yeah.
and cosseted them.
And my father wasn't a racing man at all. I just got really interested in that, and some friends of mine took me to Brands Hatch in, I think, '68, and I think we crawled under the fence as opposed to over the fence at Brands Hatch. We certainly didn't pay to go in, and I saw my
Good
first,
on you.
I saw Run Baby Run.
The Dave Brody
Dave Brody
Escort.
car.
Yeah.
And what was weird about that race, in that race with Dave Brody, was the burr pop.
Oh yes, absolutely. The Paul Berman Burr Pop. Yeah.
Yeah, the upright Ford Popular.
Yeah.
With the
Paul Berman, Mike Berman.
oh,
Berman. Anyway,
You're the historian.
the Burr Pop was an amazing thing. It was an E93A
Yeah.
Ford Popular kind of shell,
Yes.
and it became more and more and more developed, didn't it?
Yeah,
And
it's
I
very
remember Martin
quick.
Selleck's driving it, the mini racer.
Yeah.
International Shoe Findings was the sponsor, but it ended up being built as a road car somewhere. I
I
think.
think somebody built it into a hot rod or something like that. But I mean that was my first taste of motorsport, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And I really then sort of started. I was reading Motorsport under the desk at school, getting told off.
How parallel our lives ran.
And reading all those ads. And I went to school in London, in Hammersmith, at a school called Latimer, and round the corner was Taurus Tuning, the famous mini tuners. And of course they had all the cars out in the street in Ravenscourt Park Road.
So that was a bit of a mecca for you.
Oh, it's terrible. And so I really wanted to go racing, and but I didn't go into historics at all. I went into production sports cars and saloon cars. Hence the reference to dear old Jerry.
Yeah.
And really did take it, the school of hard knocks. It really was, painfully obvious that those guys didn't give or take any quarter. And it was very hard. And but very early on, I did a Wilhard 24 hours, and I applied for a place on the inaugural 24 hours, and they said, "What car have you got?" I said, "Got an MGB," and they said, "Oh, really? Is it still homologated?" And the MGB was still homologated, but they thought I was going to turn up in a new MGB LE rubber bumper car, and I turned up in a '67 Prod Sports car.
Good for you.
And they were very, very annoyed.
But at the end of the day, I mean, you were there, and
Well, we did it. We finished.
Yeah, and you're running it, I guess, on an absolute shoestring.
And we didn't have any money at all, none whatsoever.
Mechanical aptitude?
Very limited, but we managed. We had some good mates who were mechanics, all came down and helped us, and we were sponsored by Comma Oil, who delivered a pallet of diesel oil and dropped it in the middle of the paddock. We were very popular. No money changed hands. And I managed to get some tyres off Kleber, and that was it. And we just went for it. And I got my first prize money, 200 quid.
Fantastic. Doesn't happen these days, does it?
No, not
But
at all.
nor does anyone expect it these days, which is fine. So you obviously raced yourself over a number of years, but then began to take a bit more of a back seat over that time,
so, yeah.
because you couldn't afford to continue, or you actually saw that you could offer more as an organizer.
I realised that racing in your own series creates another dynamic of problems. One is, I'm paying you to look after me, and why are you racing? Well, I must be paying you too much. There was that sort of position that people thought, oh, hang on a minute, why is he racing?
It's the old salesman thing, isn't it? When the salesman in the 1980s pitches up at one of his prospects in a brand new BMW M3,
Yes.
The person looks out of the window and thinks, I'm in a 316. What's he doing that I'm not? I'll take my custom elsewhere.
Yeah, it was a little bit of that. Not so much, but also the fact is that, things happen at race meetings, and you need somebody to make a decision. And if you're stepping into a car on a grid and there is a problem, you can't deal with it properly.
No, and you also find, because everyone wants you all of the time, you find yourself, one, not enjoying the driving aspect of it because you've always your mind's elsewhere in a million places, and then you spread yourself very thin, don't you?
Yes, and I learnt that. I learnt that lesson early on, and I saw other promoters doing exactly the opposite and getting in trouble for it, or getting themselves into situations they shouldn't really get into. And I thought, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to be one or the other. I'll stay the promoter, and I'll look after my customers and make sure that they're looked after properly and get the best out of their day's racing.
So when were you first promoting as such?
I can't actually remember the date, but I did the first, you might remember, I did the first 1 hour touring car race at Silverstone. And somehow got a full grid. And everybody said you'll never get, a historic full grid. That was the start of Top Hat racing. And I managed to get a sponsor together and got a full grid of all sorts of cars, but all touring cars.
And in those days, Top Hat was the touring cars, and then there was Cloth Cap kind of followed, wasn't it, which was the sports cars.
Yeah, and then we did Oldies but Goldies, which was the older touring cars, and it developed into a 7 series carnival, really. And we started the Donington Festival, for instance, and got that going, and really sort of paved the way, because we were doing longer races. That was our USP, that we would do 1 hour races where most people are travelling from all over the country to do a 15-minute race. And I couldn't ever, having done the Wilhar 24 hours, I could never see the point of turning up to do a 15-minute race. If you're there, let's get some track time.
I think sometimes preparing a car for a 15-minute race is relatively easy, but then you come to the enduros and initially you start seeing quite a lot of cars break down early on. But it's a good way of engaging your mechanic mates. You can share the costs with one or two other drivers, or one or two mates who will come in and drive the car with you, and that brings another dynamic to it, doesn't it? That kind of air of responsibility when you're out there representing a team, not just yourself. I mean, if you throw it off the track on lap 1 of a 1 hour race, and you do it of your own volition, and you're the only driver, that's one thing. When you actually ruin your mates' days as well,
because you're
not very popular.
No, not at all. What it did was it evoked this feeling of camaraderie.
Yes.
And you'd get 4 or 5 guys. One, maybe one guy was the team manager, and that's what he wanted to be. somebody else was, more the mechanic. So you had your pit crew. It worked really well, and I think when people embraced that idea, we're going to be out there for an hour, we've got to maybe just pull the car back a bit, be there at the end. And I remember several teams who really got the idea, and they were never at the front at the beginning and always at the front at the end. And
It's all about pacing themselves,
and being clever about it, and not ragging the car. And that sort of produced a different form of historic racing. It produced sort of reliable cars, not overdeveloped, which is a great bête noire of mine. I hate it. These overdeveloped cars that ruin fabulous grids. I mean, for instance, now you don't see BMW 1800s anywhere.
No.
They're passé. They're gone. Their development has reached a zenith, and they've been overtaken yet again by Lotus Cortinas. And I think it's crazy.
Yes, that sort of those battles between the BMWs, the Lotus Cortinas, and the Alphas. They all kind of enjoyed their heydays, and then it just triggered another kind of spending war to make another marque better, and it was all counterproductive in the end because they've gone away from where they were. But
I think that's what people have got to understand. This is a big thing about historic motor racing. It's going to kill historic motor racing. We've seen a lot of modern teams who maybe have lost contracts in the modern world look over their shoulder and say, hang on a minute, we're very slick, we're very professional, and there's a lot of money in historic motor racing. Let's just change direction and get involved in that. And they can't help themselves. They want to develop the cars as though they would be developing a modern car.
Yeah, it's quite worrying, really, that sort of those sort of production saloon type cars that we talked about, and now those engines make 25% more power, maybe more than they did in period. And of course, something else breaks down the chain because you can't keep every component. We have to keep renewing, don't you, all the time?
Well, it's not only that, but I've been berated for saying this, but it's quite true. We worked it out. I mean, if you and I got a Lotus Cortina each and nipped back in a TARDIS and plonked ourselves at Goodwood with Jim Clark and Graham Hill, we'd beat them. We'd beat them hands down. That's crazy, isn't it?
With a modern one, it shouldn't happen, should it? But
in our modern Lotus Cortina,
we look at all those things though, and you look at all the eras of racing across the first era of Goodwood, and you compare the times back then, the times now. People understand suspension much better than they did. They optimised that. They probably do better at making their chassis work the tyres more. They've got more power. They've got stiffer cars, etc., etc., etc. And that's not historic racing, though. It's
they're
theatre.
Also better at interpreting the rules.
Yes.
Because if you look at the wheelbase on a Cortina, it's in a different place to where it was originally started.
Interesting you say that. But going back to your top hat and cloth cap, that kind of went away after a while, didn't it? Why was that?
Well, it was an interesting situation. I ran top hat in my sort of caravan way. We had a jolly good time, and I did have lovely old marquees that I had a deal with a marquee company that used to give me their second-rate marquees, but they were cheaper. And we'd put on lots of grub and feed the paddock. That was all great fun, but not in a corporate way, in any way, shape or form. And then as the cars got more sophisticated, the preparers came in, we started getting a new type of driver in. He had more money. He was introduced to the sport from another route. I haven't got anything against that, but there was a corporate feeling coming in, and I realised I had to do something about it. And I looked into it, and I phoned up a great friend of mine, and I said, I think I might need one of these corporate HQs to put on lunches and just have loos and stuff like that. And he said, "Got just the thing for you, Jules." And I said, "Well, what's that?" He said, "I've got Ferraris, last year's Ferraris, paddock, HQ." I said, "Really?" I said, "I can't afford that." Oh, he said, "It's no problem, you can afford it." And it came with a transporter and the whole... So I went down to see it. It was fantastic.
Thurgood trucking.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, it had bathrooms and loos and kitchens and everything. And I said, "Well, how much is that?" And he said, £55,000. And it actually wasn't a lot of money, pro rata. And I said, "Well, what do I have to do?" He said, you haven't thought it out, Jules, have you?" He said, "You need 16 people for 4 days to run it." I went, "Ah."
Plus a driver and a reserve driver for when the taco runs out.
And I thought, you know what? I'm not even comfortable with the thought of corporate. That corporate application is not me. And Masters were around, and I knew Ron Maiden very well. And Ron's a great guy, and he's got a great vision. And when he sees something, he goes for it. And he was taking over historic racing. There was no doubt about it that he was becoming the top dog, and I was becoming a thorn in his side, if you like, because I kept on chopping and changing and needling people to go into our races and stuff. And I was a competitor with him, again, but not obviously. I wasn't fighting against Masters, but I could see that the market wanted something else. And so I just said, right, I'm out. And Ron took over Top Hat Racing, which was great, and he looked after them very well. And I had a sabbatical for 3 years. And
Was that kind of a gardening leave sabbatical, or just sort of recharge your batteries?
No. I mean, obviously, if Ron had taken over my business, which he did, it's a normal thing. You don't compete. You don't go back and start something else up. And then I got a few preparers coming to me, knocking on my door, and saying, "Look, there's certain aspects that aren't being looked after." There was a fallout of cars and that weren't being catered for in this corporate world, which was a different price level. There's nothing wrong in that. And they said, "Look, these cars aren't running. They're just not racing. Would you do something about it?" I said, "Well, I don't really want to come back into it." I always had a plan to do a 24-hour race, and that was sort of my aim, and I was working along that by starting the HRDC. And I had a sort of delegation come to me, and they said, "Look, there's all these cars, they're all pre-60 cars, and they are dead in the water. Would you do something about it?" So I said, "Okay, I'll run a race, see what happens." And the thing exploded again.
Le Mans Coupés are the only manufacturer that can produce both road and FIA HTP spec GT40s with GT40P chassis numbers. All cars are factory built to the original designs, and our race cars are eligible for international competition. We also produce road and race Cobras and Corvette Grand Sports. Find iconic 60s sports and race cars at lemanscoupes.com.
So, Julius, that takes us to 2010.
Yes.
And the birth of the Historic Racing Drivers Club, the HRDC,
Yes.
as we refer to it. And it's been a very interesting ride. It's hugely popular, and it seems to go from strength to strength.
It seems to, yeah. I mean, I think it's basically because I've gone right back to the roots again, back to square one, and ensued the corporate side of it. And it's really about people, like-minded people, meeting up on a certain day with their cars and going and have a great day's racing. And that's it. It's not polished. We don't do the corporate hospitality. We have a crazy caravan that gives out cakes and coffees, and we have a sort of slightly mad prize giving, and it's just a little bit irreverent, and everybody seems to have a good time.
So it's thrills, not frills.
Exactly. That's our motto: thrills, not frills.
And it works so well. I mean, I have been to quite a few of these races over the years, but the one that absolutely stands out in my mind was Lyddon Hill last year. I'd not been to Lyddon since 1981.
Who had?
To see a Formula Ford race back in those days, but it was absolutely fantastic, and the buzz in the paddock, the collectors' cars coming in, a really, really good turnout of people, which is a bit of a novelty these days sometimes at club meetings, but it was different, and I think that is so important. People are inured, if you like, even the hardened race fans, to the same thing happening every 3 weeks at a circuit near them, because if the weather doesn't look very clever, or they actually fancy going to the shops, or it is, they'll go and do that, because there'll be another one along in a minute. Yeah. It's sort of worrisome, that kind of attitude, rather like Formula One with 22 races in a year, whatever that, it ceases to be special. But this was special. This was bringing people back to an old club racing hub. And friends of mine went to Lyddon for the first time when it was still grass. Yes. But it wasn't until Bill Chesson developed it in kind of the early 60s into kind of the shape of the place we know, kind of reversed Brands Hatch, if you like, that it began to take on its character. It does have a character all of its own. You've got that wonderful amphitheatre, where you can sit up on the bank, you can watch from your car if the weather's not so clever, you can sit on the bank if it's lovely, and it's the action happens right in front of you. You can see 95% of the circuit from any one place. What's not to like?
There's nothing not to like. It's run by a very, very enthusiastic team, and they have put the money in at the right places. You know, there's new shower blocks, new loos, there's good food there. It's just a nice place to be. And you think, why hasn't anybody else discovered it? And we're very lucky that Lyddon came to us and said, look, would you put a historic stamp on it? And we said, yeah, of course we will. And everybody who's turned up, who's raced there and who've come to watch the racing, have just said, this is great.
I think it's brilliant when you go there and you see Mike and Andy Jordan, who've done it for real there. And Mike last year was reunited with the little Alfa Romeo that was his wife's father's road car when she was a lass.
Well, not only that, they raced it. It was a race car in those days, and that's how he met his wife.
Really?
Yeah. Because his father was racing against him when Mike was running his road-going Morris Minor race car.
The Moggy Minor, yeah, absolutely. It was fantastic, and the whole atmosphere just was really special, and that's great. So you're going back to Lyddon this year.
Yes, we are.
And that's going to be really brilliant, see if you can build on what you achieved last.
Well, we're hoping so, yeah. I think local community is really behind it. And we want to sort of really make it a day. It's the 4th of July. It's quite a good day to do it, I think. The local, the locals will support it. They'll all come along, a bit like Castle Combe.
Yes, very much so.
And I think that we've got a lot of goodwill. You know, there's nobody complaining about the noise. And I think we've got a few local lads, the Watts and the Swifts, will be out with their minis, giving it hell.
Absolutely right.
Very entertaining.
It's so good, and you kick off what is a fine season. At Silverstone?
Yeah, with the VSCC,
next month.
yeah.
Vintage Sports Car Club,
Fabulous,
and you'll have some big grids.
Hopefully.
What are we going to see there?
We at Silverstone we will have the Coys 100 trophy with the touring cars from 58 to 66, mixed field, 40 plus grid there. We'll have the HRDC All Stars, which is the pre-66 sports GT and touring cars, which is basically the old all-comers.
Yeah,
Ideal.
kind of run what you brung.
Yes, yeah, very much so. If it's pre-66, you can run it. That's always popular.
And that's kind of what they used to call mark sports back in the day, rather than mod sports. It was sort of very, very simple sort of road-going cars, by and large.
Well, if you watch the old 50s BRSCC films, it was the all-comers race which they had at the end of the day. Everybody sort of...
and Bob Danvers Walker commentating on Pathé News.
Absolutely. Ding dong. And then we've got the new Alfa Romeo Challenge, which is very dear to my heart.
That's come on really well, hasn't it?
Yeah, we've just been wheedling out these Alfa Romeos that have been lying fallow. That again, it's this thing about development, and the development hasn't been there. So these cars have dropped out of various championships and series. And I thought to myself, I love Alfas. That's what my first car was, and I thought, we really want to do something about this. And people said, no, I can't race these cars. It's not developed. It's the same car that I raced 15 years ago. I said, perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Absolutely. It takes me back because I had two Alfa Sud Sprints.
Oh,
Alfa Sud TIs, in fact, they were,
fabulous.
as company cars with Autosport. And they were just brilliant, particularly on a cool, damp morning when they used to go like rockets. Yeah. Absolutely superb. And I loved those Suds. And I have very, very fond memories of them all round. But some Alfas, as a mark, it evokes tremendous history, going back to the pre-war era, of course, with their Grand Prix cars, etc. Absolutely amazing.
Well, it is, and we're taking the cars from the 750, the early 750 Giulietta series, right up to the 4-cylinder 116. So we've gone from Giulietta to Giulietta. And everything else in between. So you've got the GTAM types. Funnily enough, we've got owners with real GTA Corsas coming in and going,
really,
this is great.
Yeah.
They feel safer within that environment. They're bringing out cars that are now worth 300k upwards.
Yes.
And running it in a club race, which we're quite honoured, really.
I think they're just amazing. That 105 shape Alfa Romeo is just so timeless, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Very much so.
I'm surprised there's not actually a modern kind of take on those.
Well, I think there's a few companies making outlaw cars now, doing revisited, reimagined versions. But to be honest, the standard car is damn near perfect as a classic car, I think.
Absolutely brilliant, and there's good entry level classes within that Alfa Romeo series, isn't there?
Yeah, very much so. We're sort of championing the Alfetta GTVs, which have sort of, as classic cars, have lay fallow for quite a while. So they're not hugely expensive to get onto the track, and a lot of cars that were race cars have just reappearing. So we've got 2 Napolina cars coming in at Silverstone. In fact, we've got 4 Napolina, 2 Alfa Suds and 2 GTVs.
I remember John Dooley racing those cars back in the day.
Yeah. Great character. Yeah.
Very much so. And of course, you've got Michael Lindsay coming along to a lot of these races, overseeing the Alfas,
do you stop him?
as he's done for
how do you stop Michael?
about 50 years, I should think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And he's so enthusiastic, And it's great for us to have somebody there. He said, I'd like to commentate. And we just said, yeah, fine,
Yeah,
do
no,
it.
he's great fun doing that. It's absolutely brilliant. So apart from that, what is kind of new on your radar this year?
Well, I think it's a difficult year, as you know. We've had the craziness of Brexit,
Yeah,
and now we're dealing with
other issues.
And really, my reason d'etre is to keep things going.
So it's a year of consolidation. Right.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, having said that, of course, I put my hand up, and we're doing an Alfa Romeo race at the Silverstone Classic, which Nick Wigley phoned me up and said, look, we've got Alfa Romeo. It's 110 years of Alfa Romeo. We've got Alfa Romeo coming to support us at the Silverstone Classic, which arguably is the world's largest historic race meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, we'd like you to put on an Alfa Romeo race. And I went, oh, right, okay.
So how are we going to fund this one then?
Well, yeah, and, how do we fill 58 places on the grid? But we're going to give it a go. Why not?
Good. So you're kicking off at Silverstone, and then you move on. Where's next after that?
Well, we go to Donington.
Yep, for the
Festival.
historic festival.
Yeah, and luckily for us, I spoke to Duncan. It's a 3-day meeting, of course, with qualifying on the Friday. And we're luckily running 2 races with qualification and the race on the Sunday. So we've got All Stars and Coy's 100 Trophy, both 45-minute races on the Sunday, which is great. I started that meeting many years ago, and I always try to support it as well as I can. I love that meeting. It's
And then
fantastic. Thruxton.
Yeah, Thruxton with Historic Promotions, Duncan and his cohorts.
Yeah.
That's a lovely meeting. It's a place that people don't get to race often enough on.
No, I remember racing there many years ago with Bill Nicholson.
Yeah.
In MGBs, and it's great. And of course, it's one of those restricted circuits. It doesn't have a lot of race days, and I think it's just a super opportunity to go to a race circuit that you just don't get that privilege of racing at.
And the fastest track in the country.
Slightly daunting, yes.
Yeah.
Our cars seem to go around there really well. We have some, fantastic race. We've had some fantastic races there, so it's a good one. Yeah.
If you can bring some weather, it'd be really appreciated, because there's a lot happening there. And the BARC, which is HQ, is Thruxton, has got 1 or 2 ideas up its sleeve as well. I think we're going to see a nice little celebration of 40 years of the Tolman Formula 2 team there, and we're hoping that Brian Henson and Derek Warwick are going to come along. There's going to be one of the original team cars there demonstrated, and I remember that being launched at Goodwood in 1980, and we were there at the HRDC test day last week. The first of 2, where we saw 1 or 2 new contenders coming out and being shaken down, which was great.
Well, we're going to bring Rupert Keegan along, because of course he's the bête noire of Thruxton, as you know. And
I was there. I was there the day in 1976.
Yeah, I was there with him. Yeah, great character. But yes, Thruxton's great, and then we will move on. We'll have Lyddon, of course.
Yep, Lyddon in July, which we've discussed, and then we've got this Alfa Romeo race at the Silverstone Classic, which has moved into August this year, unusually.
Yes, and there is, as you know, there's an awful lot of motorsport on, and picking the time now is very, very important. We basically don't race from July to September. We go back into Castlecombe in October, simply because I think there's just too much content, and so we take a bit of a sabbatical.
Well, that encapsulates 10th anniversary season. It's actually the 11th year of racing, but 10th anniversary season of the HRDC. It's been a great pleasure and privilege to be here at the nerve centre of the organisation with its founder Julius Thurgood, who's one of us, absolute enthusiast, absolutely to the core, and I think that's very laudable.